We're so
Thank,
glad that you're here.
thanks for having me on, Laura. Appreciate it.
You bet. So you have quite an extensive background. I would love to hear about it. I know everyone else would too. Could you speak to um, of your background so that we can get an idea of that? Because that's quite a story in and of itself.
Journey as a firearms instructor basically began when I joined the military. I went into special forces. Most people are unaware that the mission and role of special forces, especially prior to 9/11, was we conducted foreign internal defense, or FID. So we often went to foreign countries and trained them in firearms, tactics, and infantry stuff like that, CQB, and stuff to defend themselves. So there was a
Mhm.
lot of teaching in the very beginning, and from there I went into different types of different skill sets, I guess, advanced skills that we have in special forces. I spent 3 years as an anti-terrorism instructor. I spent 3 years in a counterterrorism unit. A lot of folks call them a CIF or a CRIF today, but we did, CQB almost on a daily basis, and it was a high readiness level there. I did that all together combined for 15 years. I got out of the military, and then I wasn't even completely out of the military, and I was working overseas as an independent contractor for the government. I did a lot of stuff from, you know, um, physical security, doing protection for, PSD, executive protection, all the way to working, mentoring with host nation personnel, taking them out, training them up, and mentoring them in the battlefield. And then also, a lot of consulting overseas. I spent pretty much more or less a few full years overseas contracting, and then started getting into the teaching back in the States. But somewhere along the line, I always ended up being an instructor. I would start off maybe doing executive protection. Next thing I know, I was teaching it, you know, firearms and so forth. I've been fortunate enough that when I started Green Ops, I've, had that array of different types of training that was able to, merge into what I think was kind of that gap in the civilian sector as far as skill level. And I've been doing this for, I think, about 7, 8 years now, teaching, and it's been a pretty wild and great experience. But there's a lot of overlap between teaching people in foreign countries and then coming back here to the States and then teaching Americans how to defend themselves, because that's really what it's all about, is how do you defend yourself.
Right. And you said there was a lot of overlap there. What do you mean by that exactly?
Well, a lot of people, they you'll hear people often say stuff like, well, why should I train with this green beret? He doesn't know what it's like to be in my shoes as a civilian. Well, first of all, first and foremost, I am a civilian. I mean, I have
Mhm.
the same rules of engagement per se as anybody else walking in the United States of America. I have no special credentials or anything like that. So I have to follow the law just like anybody else. And then overseas, the other thing is that a lot of the places we would work, as opposed to like conventional units that had reinforcements and people they could rely on, we didn't necessarily have that. So we were our own defenders, and the people we
Mhm.
trained became our defenders too. And when you think about that in context of the average citizen, they don't have a QRF either. They are their own defenders. They have to rely on themselves, and that's a lot where the overlap lies. And then especially with the teaching foreigners who, one, don't speak my language, may not have the education level that the average American has. It makes it that much easier to train American civilians today.
Mhm.
you know
Yeah, I imagine there's a lot that you learned from that. You'd mentioned earlier that a couple of things you said were demos are key and that 70% of communication is not verbal.
Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of times people, they don't realize that the communication isn't just written and hearing, I mean, there's inflection and fluctuations, there's hand and arms, you move them around, facial gestures and stuff like that. And a lot of times, like if I had an interpreter that maybe was working with someone else, I could work with a student just through body motions and showing, and maybe a word or two of like, look here, see this, and then
Mhm.
have them repeat the same thing. And then a good thumbs up, or a positive look on the face is an indicator that they're doing it right. And you learn, when you're doing that when you're teaching somebody else, you learn now to get more eye contact, and then demonstrate a little bit more, because people learn through so many different ways. People learn through
Mhm.
hearing, through seeing, through touching, tactile. But if you can incorporate all of those, then you're not just getting the major portion that people learn, but also, the things that are secondary and tertiary to the way they do learn. But it kind of goes in a little faster and sinks in a little deeper when you go through all those different techniques.
Does that help, like, teach you be m does that help you be more intuitive in general with people? When you've had to teach people that don't speak the same language as you, do you tend to dial in on them in a different way and learn? Is there a technique or something you learned there that's different
Uh,
than maybe what most American instructors would know?
I wouldn't necessarily say, intuitive. I mean, it's just you start to see certain correlations. So when you grab the student's attention,
Mhm.
um, they tend to pay more attention and learn more. Things they sink in better when you have their attention. And I think as Americans, a lot of times is what we do is we have we just think that the words coming out of our mouths are going straight into the ears and the brains of the people that we're teaching. And they don't realize that there's a potential that they may not be grasping 100%, because how often do we ask people like, hey, of the group, who doesn't understand what's going on? Who is really going to raise their hand? In general,
Yeah,
that
most
number
people
is
wouldn't
pretty
admit
low,
they don't
right?
understand it. Yeah.
So, I mean, you can
So you need to be able
clearly
to tell
ask
by
that.
just looking.
Yeah, and you can clearly ask that question, and then no one will raise their hand, but you can see like 4 or 5 people out there that clearly don't understand just through their
Mhm.
demeanor.
Mhm.
So that's one is, always try to grab the attention of the individuals that we're teaching, make sure that they're understanding, grasping, picking up what we're putting down per se. But
Mhm.
little stuff like that. The other thing is physical contact. I know that in today's world, physical contact. Oh, you can't touch people, right? And even in some of the instructor courses that I've been to, they say, hey, tell the student, is it okay if I touch you? Well, I kind of get that out in the beginning and say, hey, you're probably going to be touched in this class, and if you don't
Mhm.
like it, you tell me now. Uh,
Mhm.
but just a little push on the back of the shoulder, maybe a little push on the elbow, or maybe to pull the elbow to relax it or something like that, or just touch the wrist where it needs to be a little bit stronger or straighter. Those little tactile things go a long way for a student to
Mhm.
remember that. If you say
Mhm.
something to them and you touch them and you look at them and then you show them, you've hit at all three of those. So you're showing them,
Mhm.
you're touching them,
Mhm.
and then you're telling them. And
Yeah.
so that's what you want. You try to get as much of that into each individual you can when you're running multiple students.
Yeah, definitely. I've noticed too that students are newer students that may be hesitant or a little bit afraid. They might be a little bit overloaded in the moment and they need to back off just a little bit. That if you can calm them down just a little bit and then change their focus from whatever spinning squirrel's going on in their head. But when you touch them in a certain area and say, I need you to focus on this, it tends to calm them down and bring their focus to whatever it is that you're talking about. So yeah, I do think that touch is a very effective tool,
Oh yeah, yeah,
and when
and
used correctly.
yeah. Oh yeah, definitely, definitely. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a certain obviously lines that you just people don't cross. But the other thing is
Mhm.
that, especially with new students, the one thing I see, with new or passionate instructors. They don't even have to be new instructors. They can be instructors that have been teaching for a long time. Is they tend to overwhelm the student.
Mhm.
Some students are just incapable at the time of taking in so much information. Others,
Mhm.
they want more. They want more. But what I see often though is that there are overwhelmed, and then other instructors are trying to make corrections on their trigger finger, their sighting, their stance, and it's all like whoa all at once.
Right.
Tackle one item at a time until they
Yeah.
get it right, and then move on to the next one.
Mhm. Definitely. Um, Now, you've been teaching both military and civilian for quite a while. So, what are some of the changes in trends or techniques that you've seen over the years? Um, and also, what are some of the things that haven't changed for better or worse? There's some things that you haven't seen change, and there's a reason for that. If it's not broke, don't fix it. And there's some things that you've seen change dramatically over the years. Could you speak to that?
Well, I think the one thing that has definitely changed over the years is the students. So, students are
Mhm.
now coming to class. They're far more educated than they have been before in the past. With the age of technology, we've got Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, the World Wide Web. People are going out there and they're researching the classes before they take them. I've had students show up to class who've had never had any formal training, and it looks like they've been to 10 courses or more, and you ask them, hey, what are what are you doing? And they're like, oh, I put the old Magpul videos on, and I watched them over and over again. And then I went to the range and I practiced them. And then eventually I just took my computer to the range and started doing the same thing, that, these guys were doing. And, granted, that may, some people would argue and maybe say that wasn't the best learning tool or technique, but, for the time, at the time, it was,
Mhm.
now people can do the same thing with a lot of these other instructors that have put their products on DVDs and stuff like that, or just even on YouTube, and they can go out there on their phone and they can watch a technique and they can try and do it. And then the other thing is a lot of folks, they're videoing themselves, which is a
Mhm.
key component of learning, right? Is seeing yourself, because you can't see your own errors 9 times out of 10. And so
Mhm.
they're videoing themselves and they're critiquing themselves next to maybe a world-class shooter or something to that nature. So I think that's another thing, is the average student is in general more advanced than they have been ever before. And
That's encouraging.
yeah, but at the same time, we still have those individuals who were never interested in the guns. They were never interested in self-defense, and then click, something happens, usually a violent, they were victims of a violent circumstance, and now they want to learn about guns. And so those
Mhm.
people, when they come to the range, are your typical, or what used to be the typical student. And now you have to realize that, hey, the same teaching technique that you may use for this other student is probably not going to work for this new student
Yeah,
who
that requires a very adaptable, in tune instructor. So I'd say the development of instructors is more important now than ever before, given
is.
what you've just said.
Yeah. And the other thing is, so, I have some instructors that have come and work for us, and they're young, and, they're just constantly, on several different, their computer, their Instagram, all at the same time, and they're doing something. And so their learning curve is faster. And they
Mm,
think that a lot of times that some of their students are going to be that way. And it's like, whoa, you have to give and take. You can't treat all students the same, and
right.
those are some areas where I see and some folks who just are going too fast or outrunning their headlights as instructors.
Mhm.
But students have, you have to sit there and take and realize, if you keep telling them this, the same thing over and over again, and they continue to make the same mistakes over and over again, obviously
That's
you're
not
doing something wrong.
yeah.
We need to isolate and figure out what the problem is, or move on to the next step until we can come back and circle back and then pull them offline or something to that nature. But yeah, there's definitely a much more educated student base that we've ever seen before. And at the same time, the instructor levels have just gone through the roof. Now you have more and more people out there running instructor development courses at higher levels. You have instructors who are actually out there getting better training themselves. And so I think now more so than ever, we have a ton and ton of instructors to choose and pick from. And, in the past, there was maybe a handful of instructors out there that were even doing this. And of that
Mhm.
handful, there was even a smaller number who people would say, "Oh, well, I would recommend them," but
Mhm.
now there's just so many people out there teaching that are, they're just very competent instructors out there.
Yeah, that's kind of fun. I mean, as an instructor, that's fun for me to see and, um, you know, getting involved with some other people in the industry and all of us kind of pushing each other, I think is a really, really good, powerful thing right now.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And you have tons of little groups, forums,
mhm,
Facebooks, instructor groups, and folks will get together and they'll share information. How do you do this? How do you do that? What do you do with this kind of student? And people are helping each other, as opposed
mhm,
to in the past, they weren't really communicating that way. There was no way to get all these instructors in the same little forum, I guess, if you would, and
mhm.
or of social media and communicate, and so there was a lot of infighting, I guess you would say. But now we're seeing, and even so, you're still going to see it, but now you see more and more instructors who are reaching out. Or what's even more interesting now is because of social media, you'll have an instructor say something, maybe somewhat demeaning to another instructor, and that instructor will reach out to them, and next thing you know, they're having a conversation. And
Right.
it's wow, wow. In the past it just wouldn't have happened, but now you've got instant communication going on for the world to see, and they can settle their differences online.
So technology isn't all bad.
No, no,
It
no.
has good qualities
Yeah,
too. You were
yeah.
talking about, an instructor, I think you said in Virginia, or I can't remember for sure, but, we were talking about, common objections we see with, people and why they're not training, whether it's time, money, etcetera. And what was that person doing? Cross promoting? Was that what they were doing that you were talking about the other day? They I think you said they brought him in with something. Oh, you don't remember, do you? They brought him in into the facility for one thing, and then they continued on their training, and you don't remember what we were talking
No,
about?
I do remember we
I
were talking about why people were not training.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and you said somebody had a good technique as to overcome some of those things, and
Oh, okay. Yeah,
I can't
yeah.
remember.
Yeah. So we were talking like, hey, how do we create these common objectives? How do we get these folks who aren't training into
Yeah,
training?
yeah,
And you and I were discussing the fact that a lot of times, and what we'll see in classes, are people who don't fit the mold of your flannel wearing, beard tattooed individual who comes to classes, but they are the almost exact opposite, and now they're coming to classes. And
mhm,
usually what we have found is that they have been exposed to some type of violent incident, or maybe their house was robbed or something like that. It was some type of fear brought them into class.
mhm,
But you had brought up, like, how do we get those people who aren't they didn't have anything happen to them? How do we get those folks in the class?
mhm.
And of course, everyone has, a ton of folks have guns, and they don't train, and they use the excuse of time, money, and how to, ways to overcome. And I brought up a friend of mine, Tim Reedy, and he runs a training group. I can't remember the name of it. I'm sorry, Tim, but he runs a training group here not far from us up in Bandera, and he will run IDPA matches. All right.
Oh, that's right, I remember
Yeah,
now.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, and I think it's
yeah,
awesome, because then is what he'll do is he'll find people who are interested in IDPA or just learning to shoot, and he'll get them involved in training, which will make them better IDPA competitors, right? But
mhm,
at the same time, now they're training. Now they're getting into some of the defensive training, right? And then he'll take some folks who are in his defensive classes, who are interested in defensive stuff, and he'll try to sway them into coming out and competing.
yeah,
And I think that is phenomenal, because he is, he's working both sides. He's getting, everybody interested in the same common ground of getting better, you know?
Right.
And he's got a really, really tight crew of folks. And then he'll start developing some of those students and competitors into instructor level. And I think he does an excellent job. And I tell people all the time. I go, I think it's phenomenal the way he does that, because it's like a tight knit family. Because I know, like, after training or after a match, sometimes we'll all go and eat together, and
Yeah,
I love that, the camaraderie that he brings to the folks out there. And I think that's what we need more of. We
I
need more
agree.
folks like
Yeah.
that.
Well, hello, Adam. He just popped in. Now his internet
So,
froze.
Michael, sir, I want to jump in here for. Yeah, is it still working?
It's working.
Okay, so Michael, question for you. As a cop, I fought the training of IDPA and USPSA for a long time. Can you talk to us about the necessity of and the importance of, say, shooting of IDPA, USPSA? I think that's important, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, because I follow you quite a bit, and I'm very impressed with what you do, and I think it's an important component. I'd love to hear your wisdom on that.
Well, I like to tell folks that, competition is not a gunfight, but a gunfight is a competition.
Yeah.
And
Mm.
there's correlation right there. I'm a huge advocate of competition, whether it be IDPA, USPSA, or both, because they add external elements that we're not used to on a normal range. How often do you get to shoot from the seated position, from the ground, or getting up from a car, shooting around no shoots, moving and shooting, using barricades and stuff like that? I think that's extremely important. And the other thing is, you're doing it under the watchful eye of a crowd of folks who want you to fail because they want to beat you. So there's a little bit of pressure there. And now I will tell you this: the pressure of, being shot at for real and the pressure of shooting a match are different types of pressure. But stress and pressure, the body has a hard time physically telling the difference between the two. Okay. As an example, I remember going to, my first match, and I remember the adrenaline dump that I felt and the
Yes. Yeah.
anxiety. And then I also remember at some of the bigger matches that I've gone to, or the matches where I'm really trying to do well, I remember that little bit of stress, even though it's not as much as when I first started. But I also remember the first time that I was shot at and I had to react. And it was in Route Irish, December 2005. And it was the first time that I was in an attack where I was being ambushed, right? And I can actually say this without a doubt, that I was less stressed during that time than I was at my first match. And that's the
Yeah.
goal. I mean, and again, I'm not comparing the two as far as like, hey, there's a huge difference between being shot at, but as far as my stress level goes, I just remember working, it was like, I got to do this. I got to do that. All I was focused on was getting a job completed, getting to cover, moving to the next objective, and so on and so forth. Whereas in a match, I was thinking about so many other things. And the other thing is that as I progressed into different skill sets and special forces, such as CQB and stuff like that, and room clearing, I noticed that my movements in the house, my ability to discern different targets, all that got faster and faster and more productive
Yeah.
as I had shot more matches. Now, there's a
Mm.
lot of folks out there that will say, "Hey, there's training scars that you can get from shooting matches." And I will agree ever so slightly. And that's if somebody who
Mhm.
has done nothing but shot matches, nothing else. But the majority of us who are doing this have shot matches, are also taking tactical training or involved in the defensive community some way or shape or form. Okay. And because of that, I think it just aids in your ability to, one, have better, faster, accurate shots, and two, manipulation skills. Okay. Because to me, those are incredibly important. I think every good instructor can pick out a great shooter before they even shoot their first round, just by the way
Yeah.
they pick up the gun, they load it, and holster it. I mean, there's always that one off, but in general, you as an instructor, I'm sure you see someone pick up a gun for the first time. You've never been exposed to them. You see the way they load, the way they present the gun, and then they holster up. You're going to go, that guy's a good shooter, or that gal's a good shooter. I'm not going to have to worry about them. And when you get up there, 99.9% of the times, you're correct.
Yeah, I too found that the adrenal dump of being shot at is completely different than in a competition, but somehow the correlation between competition and the adrenal dump that comes with it is oftentimes married to the same thing in an actual shooting. And so therefore, to me, the competition, though I fought it for a long time, the actual competition is one of the best preparations you can do, as long as you maintain somewhat that defensive mindset. And I think you're saying the same thing. As long as you've trained for it and kept that defensive mindset, the competition stuff is really relevant to the defensive side. And part of the mission here is to encourage people who are taking just the basic concealed carry class, the basic shooting class, to also subject themselves to the endurance, mental and emotional endurance of the competition side, so they can prepare for the fight of their life if that day ever comes. Not only that, they can have fun doing it, but they can prepare for their fight. And I think that's an important point. And it sounds like you and I are on the same page there.
I would agree, and not only that, but when it comes to competition, like I like the speed and the free form of USPSA, because a lot of people say, well, it's not tactics. Well, it is. It's you are making decisions on what is the best, quickest, fastest, most efficient way to shoot a scenario. Okay, now I will take that same type of shooting and go to an IDPA match where they require you to use cover and they require you to do certain things that are more tactical or defensive related. And strangely enough, I don't have that much of an issue translating that, because, you still got to maintain that defensive mindset per se. But the other thing I will say is that great skill can get you through a bad tactical situation. Okay. If you stand out in the middle of the open, all right, if I'm out in the middle of the open and I have 4 shooters and I'm quick enough to engage all 4 of those guys while they're running for cover and being tactical, but I'm able to accurately, quickly engage all 4 of those people before they do me, I win. Now, does that mean that was a tactically smart thing to do? Probably not. But good skill will get you out of a bad tactical situation. But if you have great tactics and no skill, you can run behind cover all day long, and you can shoot your magazine dry. And while you're dry and you haven't shot a single person, they're going to come up and get you. So those are things people need to think about.
Yeah. So could we say that really everything is really truly a balance of speed and accuracy? And I would add to that tactics. So we use the training classes such as you do at Green Ops, or we do at Defenders, or some other thing, as to help develop not just the shooting, but the tactics, but the competition, to really learn the balance of speed and accuracy and really decision making. Because decision making is part of the fight, right?
Oh, yeah.
And I find that as I'm going further and further into the competition world, dumb people don't do competition. So therefore, as you start being more proficient in your competition, therefore you're exercising the brain and the emotional power and preparing for the fight. And that's been my purview of it. And it just seems so cool to watch you as you do yours.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, people say, hey, you're doing a walkthrough, so the scenario. And it's like, yeah, that is. But what if you run into a similar scenario? It's just like saying, hey, a boxer who shadow box, well, he's doing the same moves over and over again. Well, of course he is, because he's going to do those same moves over and over again in the ring. So are you saying that a professional boxer that shadow boxes is dumb? Well, heck no, you're not, and it's going to do him well because they're going to maintain those skills. But I'm a big proponent, because of my background in special forces, of having a certain skill level before you go to the tactical level. And so like in our world, before you were allowed to do, movement, bounding, and CQB and stuff like that, you had to show proficiency in your ability to shoot. So we had a couple of courses. We've got a course now. Well, it's changed, but it used to be a 3-week course. It was called SAFALC. It's still called cephalic, but now I think it's
Mhm.
run at the group level. I've seen them as long as 6 weeks. But that first week, and it could be 2 weeks now, but that first week is nothing but flat range marksmanship. And you're working your ability, and then you take a stress test. If you pass that stress test, then you can move on to do CQB in the house, because now you've shown that you have the accuracy and skill level that you need to quickly engage a target without shooting your buddy. And then we had another course called Sephardic that was 8 weeks, and that was the first 2 weeks was flat range, and same thing. You had to pass that standard at the end, and if you didn't, you were gone. But I don't necessarily think that we need to do that with civilians and law enforcement, but we definitely need to raise the bar as far as skill set. And I see it all the time. Folks are teaching, people how to shoot underneath cars or around cars, and they're like high-fiving them. And you go and look at those targets, and there's like one or two hits. Like, well, hey, where do
Mhm.
those other rounds go? Because, as we know, we're responsible for those rounds. If you're not in law enforcement, you don't have you don't have a duty to engage people, and so you aren't going to come under the same use of force policies as a police officer, who will have some form of possible qualified immunity. As a civilian, you could do the exact same thing a police officer did, and you're probably going to go to jail, and so in my opinion, I think civilians need to be trained almost to a higher standard, because they don't have that
Yes.
qualified immunity, you
Yes.
know.
That's a
No,
good point.
fully agreed. Well, anyways, I wanted to get your thoughts on the competition side. You hit it well. Laura, I'll back out.
Well, let's see what else I have for you here, Mike. You've been so good so far. I'm not sure what direction I want to go next. I am curious to know, because you're still on the screen, Adam. Did you know that? um, I am curious to know. Oh, I forgot where I was going there. Oh, I know. I saw an interview with you and Jedi, and you guys were talking about, your dry fire program and how that like really took you from low level shooting to like just in a really short amount of time, it sounded like, to being, are you a master? What is your
Yeah.
master level USPSA?
Yeah, I'm a master class production shooter in USPSA, and master class in carry. I don't remember what I'm master class in IDPA also. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, and it's Scott and I used to joke all the time about who sold more books for Steve Anderson's dry fire
Yeah.
program, him or
Is
me.
that how
But
you started?
yeah, it's Steve Anderson's, but I definitely think Scott's really the guy. He teaches, I think, almost every day out of the year. I mean, the guy is
Yeah.
constantly on the road. But yeah,
Yeah.
so Scott and I are huge advocates of dry fire. And I think that's something that people really don't put enough effort or time into is dry fire. Everybody wants to get out and shoot, and the way I look at it now is that live fire to me is a qualifier of where I'm at in my dry fire. So I use that dry fire to get faster and faster and faster. And then I use the live fire to make sure that everything on my times have gotten faster. And of course, obviously my accuracy. And the other interesting thing is, people always want to see like, where am I shooting
Mhm.
when I'm dry firing? Well, that's what your eyes and sights are for. So if you're using sights, you should be seeing a good sight picture. If you're using a dot, your dot should be where you're aiming at on the target, and that is your confirmation right there when you're dry firing. And that's another thing.
Mhm.
People have to be brutally honest with themselves when they do that.
That's what I was just gonna say,
Um,
yeah.
and they're not. And a lot of times people they want to bring out, technology and different gadgets. But I look at it as, if you have anything where you see a dot or you see something on the target that's not going to be on your gun in live fire, then you're doing yourself a disservice, because now you're not focusing on what you should be focusing on. If you're looking at the target and you're bringing the dot up, or from maybe a red dot, then the only thing you should be really seeing is that red dot in the alpha or the down zero of the target that you're aiming at. If you're looking
Mhm.
at a dot and it's not on the target, from a laser or something like that, now you're not looking at your target. You're looking at that laser.
Mhm.
Same thing with the iron sights. If you're, and some folks I've heard them say, well, I line I line the laser up so I can't see it if my sights are perfect. It's like, well, you have peripheral vision, you're going to see it, which takes away from your focus of looking where you need to look, you know. People are just not quite as they don't understand how much eye speed and your vision affects your shooting, but it's
Mhm.
significant. I've done a couple exercises where there's some great exercise. You can see different exercises out there for building eye speed and stuff like that. You can do some research. There's even strings that come with little balls, and you look at them and focus from near to far and stuff like that. But I have taken, and I've had other people do it too, where they'll take certain drills, they'll shoot a drill live, and then they'll do this some extra eye exercises and do the same drill, and they'll take maybe half a second to a second off of that drill just by doing that. Focus on
You're
their
kidding.
yeah, because it's that
Wow.
important, and people, they just don't realize how much that affects their ability to shoot. Eye speed and vision is huge. Obviously, the basics, getting the basics down and stuff like that, it's something that
Mhm.
people need to focus on.
Mhm.
I think, and initially, but if people are trying to get better and become, quicker, they're going to try to move their muscles quicker and their gun quicker, when the reality is they need to move their eyes quicker.
So they need to think more quickly almost,
Oh yeah,
rather than
thinking
move
it's
more quickly.
yeah. I mean, the your eyes, you'll move your eyes. Your eyes are going to see, from target to target to target. Your eyes pick up motion during the day. At night, the first thing it picks up is light.
So then you talked about earlier how some people would watch a video of how to do something the right way technically in shooting and then try to replicate that. Do you think it's a good idea to video yourself when you're dry firing as well? Is that a helpful tool?
Yeah, so we have at Green Ops, we teach classes, and one of the things we always talk about in the beginning of our classes and our after email classes, or after class email we send out, we always talk about the 5 pillars of success. And videoing is definitely one of those things, because you can't tell a lot of times what you're looking at. You can't tell a lot of times what you're doing physically. You think it looks good, but when you see or review the video, you see major mistakes that you are shocked that you would have seen before.
Mhm.
And in this way, you're becoming your own coach, because now you're able to take, which is another great thing is, you can take your video of you shooting and you can overlay it or lap it next to somebody else shooting that's maybe a professional shooter or an advanced shooter or a world class shooter, and you can try to mimic as close as you can to see, or just see your errors. Where's the change? Where's the differences? Are they moving to the gun quicker? Once they get up there, are they more efficient in their draw stroke? And you can do it not just for your draw stroke, but also for your movement from point A to point B, if you're trying to work stuff like that too.
So would you say that is there am I accurate in saying that everyone, I believe anyway, I think shooters develop their own. I know there are technical things that must be done for speed and efficiency and accuracy, but I noticed in a lot of the shooters that I like to watch, they all have a different, I guess I call it style almost. They have a little bit different way of their draw stroke is a little bit different on all of them. Um, so I guess when you said to emulate certain people, I'm just wondering, how do you know if that style is gonna work for you? Should you just be copying somebody else, or is there something you can intuitively, like, look in with your own way of doing things, like, "Oh, this works better for me, but this doesn't," or most people not able to diagnose that on their own?
Yeah, you can do that. Obviously, I mean, like let's say we have two shooters that are world class shooters and they're drawing. Now, I will say that they may have some differences, but those differences are going to be very minute. You're not going to talk.
Mhm.
We're not talking extreme
Yeah,
differences.
right.
Um, and then if they're both doing something different and you pick one, what's going to be wrong with that? Because you're
Yeah.
following the motions of a world class shooter. Now,
Mhm.
the other thing you can do if you want to individualize that for you, is what you can do is you can take this thing called a pro timer, and you can go to the range and try those two different techniques. And the one that's quickest, even though it may not feel like it's the best technique for you, is probably the one you should be using, is the one that's the quickest, because the pro timer or shot timer doesn't lie. It doesn't tell you something you
Mhm.
want to hear. It's going to give
Yeah.
you time. And a
Mhm.
lot of times folks will say, "Oh, this feels better. It feels better for me. This is
Mhm.
more better for me." But when you put it on the timer, you're 10 seconds slower. Do you really think that's
Right.
good for you in a gunfight, you know?
Why
So
is
I
it
like
that we lose our perspective or our perception when we're shooting? I've noticed that a lot. People will
yeah.
say that they felt this certain way and that's not reality. I wonder what that
Mhm.
is.
Well, I mean, it just seems to be a certain flow, the way people move, or the way they do stuff. And that is sometimes can be counterintuitive or counterproductive because we're looking for the most efficient, not necessarily the most flow that we're looking for.
Yeah.
And so
Okay.
the timer is an awesome tool. You use the timer not only in dry fire, but you got to use it in live fire. And when you put them together, then you're going to see people who go through the roof. I think Steve Anderson once said he never met a C-class shooter with a plan. Because if you have a training plan, you're probably out of C-class. And to put
Mhm.
that in context, years ago, your average firearms instructor for law enforcement and the military were probably about a C-class shooter. So that's not a bad shooter.
Mhm.
Um, and so, how do you get out of that? How do you go from C-class to B-class? And it's easy. One, you train. You come up with a training plan and you do it. You dry fire, you use a timer, and then you take the information. And that's the other thing is you have to be analytical about some of this stuff. And
Yeah.
people just aren't. They're not interested. They're and that's
They
the other
only
thing
wanna
is
do what's fun to them, Mike.
well, not just that, but you have different types of people. Like to with so much information overload coming in from the younger generation, a lot of them want to know the down and dirty of why. They want to know all because there's just so much information out there, and they're
Mhm.
constantly seeing short 15-second, um, you know, um, shorts on YouTube or IG or TikTok,
Mhm.
and so the information overload that's coming in. And
Mhm.
so when they come to class, they want to know those whys. And then you have some folks that even maybe that same age, they don't care why. They're like, just tell me how to do it, dude. You know,
Yeah.
like, okay. And
Yeah.
they'll rep it out and do it over and over again. So you have different types of folks who will learn different methods or learn for whatever reason a different way. But either way, you have to show them what is right through
Yeah.
demonstration, and then they have to show themselves on video. And so that is the key for some folks who, how do I say, some folks, they want to go to that next level. And if they're going to do it on their own without a coach,
Mhm.
then they need to be able to self-analyze. They need to be able to review. They need to be very analytical. If they got a coach and they got someone telling them what to do, then hey, that's fine. They just do it the way their
Mhm.
coach tells them to do it.
Mhm.
But most of us don't have that ability. Most of us don't have the ability to go, hey, coach, what do I need to do today? Um,
Right.
and so that's something
Well,
else to consider.
I would argue I think some of the best coaches are the ones that can teach you something in a class, but then can give you the tools you need to take that home and work on that yourself. I find that I've only found a few coaches that were able to do that, and that's a very valuable thing that you can take from a class when you're able to go home and go, "Oh, I don't need that person standing next to me the whole time." In order
Yeah.
to improve or get better because you know the why of what you're doing and you've understood it on a deeper level, then you can take that and apply it once you get home, and I think that's incredibly valuable.
And that is, I think that's important that when someone leaves a class, and I got caught up on this, but I'll say this, and some people will say, oh well, how does and I know this because I got caught up on it. But I went through a period where all I did was, especially when I was in the military and your tax dollars were paying for my training, all I wanted to do was go to training classes. I'm going to get better if we go train with this instructor, we're going to get better. We go to train with this instructor, we're going to get better. And, until I learned and realized that we needed to take what they were teaching us and implement it ourselves, I
Mhm.
wasn't getting any better.
Mhm.
Um,
You would get
but
better for a little bit probably, but then
yeah, and then go
Yeah.
right back down to where you were
Yeah.
before, you know?
Mhm.
And that was just, one of those things where it's like, oh, if we go to this shooting school, we're going to be so much better, and like you said, yeah, it was. We would get back in a week or two, we were shooting, quickly, fast, accurately. It was amazing. And then a couple weeks later, because we weren't following up on the training regimes that they had recommended, but and that's important. But the other thing to realize is that um, the hard work can break through inefficiency. Okay, so as an example, years ago, there's a video of Tomasi. I don't know if you know who he's a big competitive shooter, but he was shooting on the Army Marksmanship Unit. And he had a dry fire video of him reloading, and the gun stayed basically right here, right? And he reloaded.
Mhm.
It was an amazingly quick reload. It was probably like less than a second, right? And so everyone realized that, hey, the quickest way to reload is just right there, right? I mean, his gun came back ever so slightly, and the magazine from his new gun, new mag, almost hit his old mag coming out. It was that quick, right? And so it's like, wow, that's the quickest way to do that, right? Well, you can watch videos of some of the world class shooters out there that have trained, and they will basically bring the gun down here. They'll look at it, they'll look completely at the ground, do their reload, and come up. But they're world class shooters.
Mhm.
So who's right? Well, they're
Yeah.
both right because they're both getting it done in a, Olympic, levels of speed and accuracy. So
Mhm.
maybe that guy who was doing it down here, maybe he didn't watch that video, but maybe he just did thousands and thousands and thousands of reloads where he did it like that, where it's like, well, that's going to work for him. So hard work does pay off, and I think some folks will overanalyze and go, what's the best method, best technique, and if you dry fire and you get better and better and better, that's the best technique.
Yeah, all day long. Totally. Well, I don't know how this hour went by so fast, but we're almost out of time. Guys, if you have any questions for Mike, please drop those in the comments. I have one last question for you. Um, Actually, I have a lot that I haven't got to yet. I don't know if you would ever consider coming back on someday, but um, I want to talk about some of the most influential people that you have learned from in your life. And it could be training or it could be otherwise, but I'm just interested to learn um, who influences Mike Green.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm grateful and thankful to so many people out there. When I first came in the military, and I went to these awesome shooting courses that they had in Special Forces. They sent us out to civilian shooting schools, and I gained a certain level of proficiency. But the guy who I didn't really know from Adam, we had a mutual friend. I had a friend that lived near a guy named Kyle Lamb, and he introduced me to Kyle, and Kyle took me to my first USPSA match. He didn't know me. I
Mm,
didn't work with him. I wasn't one of those guys, and but he basically went through that process of making sure I had the right gear for the match, calling me the day before to make sure that I was actually showing up. And then when I got there, he walked me through and showed me how to do all this stuff. And I thought, hey, I've been to a ton of shooting schools at this point, so I'm going to just smoke this. And it was quite the opposite. But to me, that was so impactful that somebody of his caliber, and at the time nobody really knew, he didn't have Viking tactics, and he wasn't the legend that he is today. But even back then, he had a certain era of respect by other shooters around him, and
mhm,
he, for whatever reason, was the nicest guy in the world to me, who was just introduced through a friend of a friend. And he introduced me to USPSA, and he introduced me to other shooters that would come to town and train with those guys. And I was just amazed that that he did that for me. And I'll always be grateful for that. But,
that's so
you know,
awesome.
as I grew and started shooting, I became really good friends with Frank Garcia. He's a USPSA IPSC Grandmaster, world class shooter. He had a huge influence on my shooting skills and ability. And then Steve Anderson really, really changed my whole concept of shooting, of going to the next level with his mindset and his dry fire stuff.
Mm.
And in the self defense world, a big, huge influence on me is Tom Givens. The way he does his defensive classes, that's where I met Adam, was at a Tom Givens Rangemaster course, and
Mhm.
I think that his impact on the community is so like underrated. There's people out there that have never heard of Tom Givens, and I'm like, wow, how can you not have heard of the guy?
Mhm.
But he has done so much, and as far as like opening my eyes into the civilian world, defensive shooting, and how that impacts, and how we need to really work on the mindset of our students to be in legal justified um, mode, and that they have to have a certain skill set and a great mindset, and to like always be aware. And he just has so much data and references. I can't stress that. Those are the first guys that come to my head. But I mean, there's tons of other folks out there who have really influenced me as a shooting instructor. There's just, I've got great friends in the community. We talked earlier about Scott Jitlinski, amazing guy,
Mhm.
amazing instructor. There's so many folks out there. I could probably we could spend an hour just talking about all the people who have influenced and helped me out throughout my shooting career.
Yeah, and those people are so, so important. And so you were talking about the people that influenced you, but you influence very many people as well, Mike. Uh,
I,
and
I
so
hope.
my last well, you do, yeah, you do. And, my last question for you is what are you hoping that your legacy is that you leave behind? What is it that you're building, and what is your legacy?
Well, I think the is what I would like to do is to, and I think I've kind of already done that in some aspects. Is I've got a team of guys in Northern Virginia and some folks here in Texas, but the guys in Virginia are phenomenal. They are able to take, and it's funny because my buddy Josh, who will say, "What would Mike do?" And I asked him, like, how do you always come up with the right answer? And he goes, well, because when I'm out there, I just think, what would Mike do? But and he says it jokingly, but
Yeah.
it's amazing to have guys like that. And I guess my goal would be to eventually just come up with an instructor development program where I can take everything that those guys have and redistribute it to the other instructors, because those guys are phenomenal. They're fire and forget. They run classes all the time. The feedback we get is amazing on the instructors that work with us. And they're all leaders, and honestly, I couldn't do it without them.
Well, I'm sure you've had quite a role in that as well. You're very humble about that.
I hope so. I hope a little bit.
Well, let's see. I did have one question here. How much dry fire do you do weekly or daily? And do you have a particular method of approaching and doing your own dry fire?
So I don't have. Let me grab something here. I don't have I don't have. I guess I do in some degree, but I have this book right here from Steve Anderson, Refinement and
Mhm.
Repetition. I've also got a Ben Steger book on dry fire that's really good. But my base is out of here. These are in my opinion. He's got three books. I've got all three of them, but I think for me, my average routine of dry fire is drills 1 through 12. I do them not only from like a USPSA rig, but I also do them from concealment sometimes. And it depends. What am I focusing on? So as an
Mhm.
instructor, I've got different goals. If I'm teaching a class that's going to be from a certain holster, then I'll incorporate that holster. If I'm teaching concealed carry stuff or covert carry stuff, then I'll move more towards that. It's a little bit difficult for me to progress in some areas because I'm constantly changing holsters, and depending on who I'm teaching, I may have to change guns. But in general, um, that is my go-to. That is my go-to. Um, I think there's nothing wrong with, like, I've got Ben Steger's book, and I'll do some drills from there every now and then if I'm trying to get focused more on a match mode. If I have a match that I want to try to get better at, I shoot matches, not to the extent of what I'd like to. I'd like to try to get into like some regional and state level matches, but if I'm trying to get to a certain level, I may take some drills from Ben's book. But in general, it's going to be Steve Anderson's book. And then the other thing is that even though those are designed for pistol, you can use those same drills. If I'm teaching a carbine class, then I'll do the same thing, but instead of drawing from the holster, I'll do from a low ready or a high ready. And then I'll do my turns, I'll do my reloads and stuff like that, and try to, get more prepared for the carbine class doing that. But that's pretty much it. If there's something specific, like say, for example, if I'm doing carbine, I like to go from standing, kneeling, and prone, then I may
Mhm.
do something, if I'm teaching a carbine class, may do some of those prior to the class coming up so that I'm a little bit more, not so much as rusty, but a little bit more on it for that.
Mhm.
But in general, I think that I could take that book right there and pretty much come up with great other ideas just off the book alone. So,
That book
but
came
yeah,
out how long has that book been out? Quite a while, hasn't it, Mike?
yeah, yeah. Let's see if there's a date on this thing in here. And the other thing is that if you buy one, don't let anyone borrow it. Okay, because I've had like 5 of these. So so I have to constantly keep buying a new one every time I let somebody borrow it. But I've written so much in this one that I'm hoping that nobody will take it. Um, I don't see a date on this.
I wanna say it's, like, 2010 maybe, I can't remember for sure.
2003.
3!
Yeah,
Oh, a lot
yeah,
longer than I thought.
yeah,
Yeah, and
and,
still
and
relevant. Yeah.
yeah. Oh, very, very relevant.
Mhm.
When you have guys like Steve Anderson, who became a grandmaster in less than a year, and guys like Ben Steger, who's come up and done the same thing in less than a year, you want to take what those guys put out, and you probably want to listen to them.
Mhm.
And I've done that. When I do that, like when I sat there and listened to what Steve had to say, and I took 3 to 4 months and I focused on dry fire. In less than a year, I went from E class to master class. So I think
Less
that's,
than a year, wow.
yeah, yeah. But I'd been shooting for a while. I just wasn't
Mhm.
progressing.
Mhm.
And that's the other thing, is that people, they don't realize there's so much great information out there. Um, and even if you don't shoot competition, these are great
Yeah.
drills to do. We have folks who come to our classes and will recommend the book, and then next thing you know, like somebody sent me a video of a guy, and I'm like, man, this guy's burning it down. Like, holy cow, this is awesome. I go, he looks familiar. And they're like, he should. He's been to like 3 of our classes. I'm like, oh yeah. And
Oh.
next thing you know, it's what were you doing? He's like, man, he goes, I bought that book and started dry firing. And now I see videos of him shooting matches, and he's crushing it at matches. And it's like,
That's
wow, this is
awesome.
this is awesome. I'm scared to shoot with the guy, to tell you the truth. But no, but
That
no,
is
but
awesome.
phenomenal. And when guys like that ask me about a match or something like that, I'll tell them, hey, this is where you go, this is what you do.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's definitely plenty of folks out there who are taking the information, using it, processing it, and getting better, amazingly better too.
You get out of it what you put into it, I suppose,
Oh,
don't you? Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah. Well, we need to finish up for tonight. Is there anything that you wanna wrap up with, Mike? Any final thoughts for our audience? You've been
No,
an absolute pleasure to have on. You're so easy to interview. I
well,
appreciate it.
well, thank you. No, I would just say that, right now we're seeing a lot, and we've always seen it. We've always seen a little bit of infighting in the gun community per se. Um, but I just want people to remember, especially those guys that are at a higher level, that, at one point we didn't have all the information. We were down here, and, we did stupid things, or things that we would say, I wouldn't necessarily say stupid, but we're ignorant of at the time. And so when we see other instructors out there doing those things, instead of poo-pooing on them, those guys are developing the next shooter that's going to come to your class. If you're not going to go out there and teach a basic class for the basic student, then why don't you just try to be nicer?
I love that. Great advice, Mike. That is a great way to wrap up the show. Thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate your time.
Well, thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
So we need to wrap up tonight, guys. We went over the hour mark and I didn't even ask all the questions I wanted to, but I didn't want to interrupt Mike because I really respect the guy. He's always got great information and he was so good to have on. So really appreciate him coming on tonight. So next week we have in store Tim Heron from Tim Heron Tim Heron Shooting, and he is a USPSA Grandmaster and master class CDP shooter in IDPA. So he's been instructing since 2015 and loves working with people of all skill levels, has a heart for teaching, and makes a personal investment in the improvement of every shooter he teaches. So we're going to have Tim Heron on next week. So if you have any questions for Tim, you can always email me, Laura at Defenders-USA. Laura is spelled Lora. And we plan on seeing you and Tim Heron next Wednesday at 7 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. Until then,